the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. Happy holidays to everyone. It's going to be an exciting weekend as the Steelers take on the Raiders on Christmas Eve. Breaking that down is Chris Carter, myself, and Brian Batko. We're the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on the North Shore Drive podcast, getting you ready for the holiday weekend and the matchup to come with Steelers-Raiders as the Steelers fight for their last-ditch playoff chances. All that and more right here. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. And here we are, the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He is Brian Batko. We're breaking things down. Steelers Raiders here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and especially on YouTube. Check out the North Shore Drive podcast, Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as all the daily content that comes out here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by liking this video, subscribing to this YouTube channel to get all of the content we produce here. Thanks for checking us out all the time. Today's episode is brought to you by the Acrisure Fan Advantage, the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. By using augmented reality, you can get an exclusive pregame breakdown from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights on starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage. No apps or downloads, just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage and get a real edge on this week's action. Brian, you're festive here with the Christmas tree. I don't know what the headband.
Antlers, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, they're Christmas trees, but they're antlers, kind of.
Your face.
Oh boy. Yeah, I guess in lieu of a Santa hat, going with this look to spread some holiday cheer to all the listeners. But well, I guess listeners can't see it, but to the viewers out there in YouTube.
There you go. There you go. Just for the record, Brian's festive. I'm wearing my normal stuff. I got a Tribe Called Quest hoodie on right now for the Midnight Marauders album. But you know, it's red. It's red and green. There's red and green up.
It's December. It's only December 23rd. We can't expect too much out of Christopher Carter just yet. Maybe Christmas Eve he'll get into it.
Maybe. I might have a red and green suit lined up for y'all in the press box. But don't count on it. But anyway, let's get into this matchup. One thing that we haven't had a lot to talk about, because with the unfortunate passing of Franco Harris, we of course needed to talk about that a lot and the impact he had, not just on the Steelers, but the city and all of football with the way he carried himself. And you guys have done a great job of covering how the Steelers have talked about him and how even still, 50 years after the Immaculate Reception, he has made an effort to build relationships with the newest players. You know, Kenny Pickett, Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris, all these guys, they know this guy. It's not like he's just a legend that's just off somewhere else doing his thing. They know who Franco Harris is. They've met him. They've shook hands with him. They've talked to them, and there's a level of respect there. I do think that you guys have done a great job reporting on that. And Brian, not for nothing, but it does feel like this team is sort of, you know, a little bit more motivated this week to win, to honor Franco.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a little bit of a double-edged sword when something like this happens. I mean, as Mike Tomlin put it on Wednesday, you know, yes, we lost a great one. We are preparing to play kind of in his honor and make him proud. But at the same time, when he was asked a question about extra motivation, like you mentioned there, Chris, you know, he said, we're professionals. You know, this is our job, regardless of any of the outside circumstances that are dealing with it. But you know, certainly the three guys you mentioned specifically, Najee Harris and Franco, you know, share a position, share a last name. That was kind of one of those unavoidable parallels when he was drafted last year. Man, Harris and Harris, 50 years later. Then you've got Kenny Pickett, who's from Ocean Township, New Jersey. Franco Harris grew up in Mount Holly, New Jersey, about an hour away from each other. So there's that connection. And of course, Pat Freiermuth with the Penn State ties. I mean, if anybody appreciated Franco when he was drafted by the Steelers, it was Freiermuth. So that's, you know, one of the cool things about a tragic situation is that his legacy is going to loom over this game Saturday night in a good way, I think. And if there's any amount of extra inspiration to be drawn from that, you know, maybe the Steelers can put that into their play and more so put into their preparation this week if there were any heads hanging at all, having to play on Christmas Eve. You're 6-8. You know that this thing's getting away from you a little bit, but certainly this is an added layer to it all, and people better be wearing layers if they're going to the game at Acrisure Stadium.
No, I agree. Yeah, bundle up. It's going to be cold as all get out. But let's talk about some of the the players that are in the game, and Kenny Pickett returning from his concussion protocol injury. Really interesting stuff from Ray Fittipaldo, and you got you guys covering this. Him talking about he self-reported what was going on in the middle of the game. A lot of people wondering, why didn't the Steelers catch this? It's because the tests he passed those tests, but part of this is also players acknowledging themselves, like, hey, this ain't right. I need to the tricky things with concussions is that there are things that can get missed. This is not a science. I mean, as much as this is science, this science is not defined, and there's not a book out for how all of this is happening. And part of this is players do need to self-report. Kenny Pickett self-reported himself, and since then has gone through the process, looks to be ready to play here.
And he acknowledged that last week he was practicing, but it was it was scout team stuff. So he was basically like, could we have pushed it last week and said, hey, you'll get cleared just in time and you'll be good to go, maybe. But he said he's really glad that they didn't do that. Obviously, it worked out for the Steelers. Mitch Trubisky played his I would say his best game of the season, and they beat Carolina. Gives Kenny an extra week to recover, of course. And I do sort of wonder, though, Chris, will there be any amount of rust? He hasn't actually completed a pass since December 4th in Atlanta, because that Ravens game, we know he got knocked out on the 5th or 6th play. He hadn't completed a pass, but before Roquan Smith took him down, and then he went out for another series and was feeling some of those symptoms recurring and pulled himself out of there. So he's obviously been staying engaged mentally, even physically. Last week he was able to do some stuff on the practice field, but for a rookie who might normally hit that infamous rookie wall this time of year anyway, he's going to have all of that kind of stacked against him. And it's just going to be, I think he said a couple times now this week or this month when talking about these cold weather games, he's not sure if he's played in temperatures this frigid. And a lot of guys on this team probably haven't. We know a lot of guys on the Raiders probably haven't. They play indoors half their games at least. So just some questions that Kenny Pickett's going to, or not some questions, some challenges that he's absolutely going to have to overcome Saturday night in his first game back.
Certainly some challenges, and this is one of the things that was talked about, like his small hands and can he handle cold weather? And let's be real. Kenny Pickett has handled cold weather. He's dealt with cold games. He's played for Pitt. He's played in Pittsburgh.
But you don't play in December in college football.
Exactly. This is 3 degrees we're talking about here, and on that river it's going to feel negative. Like it's gonna be cold as all get out.
They're gonna be throwing a brick around out there, are they not? I mean, that's why if it's possible, just stick that brick into Najee Harris's chest and let him run with it, rather than trying to air that thing out down the sideline to George Pickens or Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, I certainly think that's a big part of this game. A lot of this could come down to the trenches for the Steelers. The offensive line's been playing better, and it looks like the Raiders might be missing Andrew Billings. He hasn't played a lot this year, and he's a big part of that defensive front. They still have Max Crosby and the guy Chandler Jones and the guys on the edges that make up here. But I do think a lot of this comes down to the guys in front of Kenny Pickett. Can they make it so that the passing game isn't needed as much? Because you're right, it may not be also as much as Kenny Pickett throwing the ball, but also Deontay Johnson, who's had a problem catching balls. George Pickens, who's also from the South, so he hasn't played as much in these cold weather temperatures. This could very much be a game where if they want to honor Franco Harris, they're going to need to play the way that Franco Harris played back in the 1970s and run the ball
and give it to Harris. Yeah, that's this Raiders defense. Nobody really scares me other than Chandler Jones and Max Crosby if I'm the Steelers. I mean, these last couple of weeks, your defensive challenges have been pretty stout. I mean, the Panthers and Ravens, they've got playmakers really at every level. Yeah. The Raiders they're kind of a top-heavy unit in that way. I mean, Denzel Perriman's been a pretty productive inside linebacker for them, but the secondary, I mean, Deron Harmon, he's getting up there in age. There's a reason why they only have 4 interceptions this season. They're tied for the second fewest in the league. So they're not being very opportunistic on the back end. They're not making a ton of plays on the ball. Cornerback has been a revolving door for them to some degree as well. Jonathan Abram, first-round pick at safety for them a few years ago, did not pan out. So there's a reason why they have not been able to protect leads. They've just been a disappointing group in general this year, despite loading up with Devontae Adams for Derek Carr on offense.
Absolutely, it's a big question for this game. As far as how they're going to make that happen, we got to flip the sides and talk about the Steelers defense though, because that is where the power in this Raiders team lies. Josh Jacobs, leading rusher in the NFL. Devontae Adams, arguably the best receiver in the NFL. Derek Carr, a steady quarterback. But that offensive line, that might be the key to the Steelers disrupting what they do with all the playmakers that they have. We'll get into that in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, we're going to talk to you guys about Valley Pool and Spa. Wouldn't it be nice that while it's cold and snowy and everything's cold outside, wouldn't it be nice to have a hot tub or a swim spa or a sauna on the inside? And Valley Pool and Spa can help you make that a reality. Relax and soak in a hot tub or a swim spa from Valley Pool and Spa before the snow flies. Or heck, the snow's flying right now. You can get it installed and you can help stay away from that. I had to salt my walk outside in 3-degree weather. It's not fun. What would be fun was if I got to relax and rejuvenate in a Finlay sauna that'd be melting my stress away faster than the Frosty in Aruba. Save big now on all in-stock hot tub swim spas and saunas at valleypoolspa.com. That's valleypoolspa.com. Also, you can get all your Pittsburgh Steelers, Pittsburgh Penguins, Pittsburgh Pirates gear. You want to get some last minute or some late holiday gifts. Maybe you didn't get to see some family yet and you're seeing them after the holidays. Go to Yinzers in the Berg, and they also have their online store, yinzerspgh.com. They have all your Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more with all the teams as you could imagine. Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, Pitt, everything Pittsburgh, right there at Yinzers in the Berg. They have 2 stores in the Strip District, plus their growing online store, again, at yinzerspgh.com, where you can find all the apparel that you could shake a stick at and get any of your late shopping done that you haven't been able to get done for your favorite Pittsburgh sports fan. At Yinzers in the Berg, find them at yinzerspgh.com. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, let's get to talking about the defense here, Brian, because the Steelers defense really came alive last week, allowing only 21 rushing yards to a Panthers offense that ran 200 yards just the week before. Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi were huge in that effort. I thought they dominated the line of scrimmage. And now they're facing an offensive line that looks really beat up right now. They already have 2 guys on injured reserve, but now you have both their guards, Dylan Parham and Alex Bars, both questionable for this game. Dylan Parham and Alex Bars limited in practice the last Wednesday and Thursday, both listed as questionable. I was talking to my man, your boy Q, who runs the Locked On Raiders podcast, and he said he doesn't feel good about them playing in this game. If that's the case, this needs to be a game where that Steelers defensive front takes over, and if you do that, maybe you find a way to minimize the playmakers that this offense has.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it before the break. I mean, Derek Carr, solid to good quarterback. Devontae Adams, I think he's tied for the league lead in touchdown receptions with Travis Kelce, and I believe he's 4th in yards, so he's still legit. Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, they've both been banged up this year. I know that because I had both in fantasy on separate teams. But when they're healthy, when they're right, they're Pro Bowl caliber players. Renfrow made it last year, and Waller's been one of the best receiving tight ends in the league for a few seasons now. Mm-hmm. So you just look at the team on paper and you wonder, why are the Raiders 6-8? Well, we discussed the defensive deficiencies that have let teams creep back into games when they should be put away, but also the offensive line has been an Achilles heel for Carr and Adams and Waller and Renfrow. However, the fact that Josh Jacobs still leads the league in rushing, it speaks to how good he has been in what's a career year for him. I mean, yeah, former first rounder out of Alabama, before Najee Harris, one of those backs who kind of helped set the tone for the next wave of rushers in Tuscaloosa. But a lot of folks in Vegas, and I guess I should say Oakland too. They still have fan bases and they still have fans in Oakland. Yeah. A lot of Raiders fans, to be safe, really weren't sure about Jacobs going into this year, like kind of ready to maybe be done with that experiment, I think. And it's could be a little bit like the Steelers looking into the future with Najee Harris when it comes time for contract extensions, 5th-year option, all that good stuff. But Jacobs has blown any of those concerns out of the water with what he's doing this year, because when you don't have a real dominant offensive line and you're still averaging more than 5 yards a carry, you're your own blocker a lot of the time. Terrell Austin even said on Thursday that, a play that stood out to him was against the Seahawks. Jacobs bounced right off former Steelers nose tackle Al Woods' So, first of all, if you've got a dominant offensive line, nose tackle's not touching you. But if you don't, and you're still, just careening off of that guy, you're doing something right as a back. He's got that contact balance. He's got good power, good vision. This could be a game tailor-made for a couple of Crimson Tide backs to go at it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, those Alabama running backs, man, sometimes they are truly special. Josh Jacobs been truly special in this game. And I've said this a lot this week on several different radio shows and everything, but I truly think the emphasis for this game needs to be to stop Josh Jacobs. When you look at how the Raiders have performed this year, when they've won their games, he's averaging 60 to 70 yards more on the ground versus their losses. He also has 8 touchdowns in the win versus 3 touchdowns in their losses. But when you look at Devontae Adams, his numbers only 20 yards more in the games that they've won, and he has twice as many touchdowns in the losses as much as the wins. To me, and I asked Mike Tom about this on Tuesday in his press conference. I asked him, how do you plan to stop Devontae Adams when you've been eaten up by a lot of really good receivers this year? He talked about, hey, you know what? We're not going to eliminate him. And I think that was an acknowledgement. That guy is too good to eliminate from the game. But if you make sure he doesn't crush you, if you keep him from having an A.J. Brown type of day with 3 touchdowns and just utterly destroying your defense, you can sort of keep him if you keep him contained, you force this offense to beat you another way. And so you keep him contained and you make sure that the run game isn't crushing you. And I think that's the priority here. Make sure the run game doesn't crush you, and trust your secondary to say, hey, you know what? Devontae Adams is going to make the plays that Devontae Adams makes. But if he's not able to take over the game, that's the key, because if the run game isn't going, you're forcing Derek Carr to throw a bit more in these cold environments, with a rock, as you said, with the quarterback situation with the cold weather. I do think that the Steelers defense has a chance to make this happen. And I also think that with the way that they played last week and maybe a little bit extra motivation, as we talked about with the Franco Harris situation right now, there's a chance they could come out and at least early stop the Raiders' run game and limit Josh Jacobs. You don't need to make him only have 21 yards rushing like last week, but keep him to that 80 mark. Keep him from in week 1 when they beat the Bengals, Joe Mixon had about 80 yards. That's where you need to keep these guys. Don't let them take it over.
And bend but don't break. I mean, it's easier said than done, but don't anticipate this being a game where a lot of points are scored.
No.
When the Raiders get into the red zone, buckle down. If they get to the goal line, buckle down. Try to hold them to 3 instead of 7. I mean, it's going to be the margin for error in this game, much like every Steeler game that is close, is just going to be razor thin. I mean, they haven't turned the ball over in any of their wins. So winning the turnover battle, as always, is crucial. We'll get into that more in the third segment when we make predictions. Last thing I'll say about the matchup, Steelers defense versus Raiders offense, is just it's going to be a collective effort to try to stop Devontae Adams. It's not going to be one guy seeing him all night. Cam Sutton, Levi Wallace, they're going to move him around. The Steelers need to be able to, whoever they put out there across from him, that guy's going to be able to need to make plays, or like you said, at least don't let him get behind you and change the game.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about that in the final segment. We give our predictions here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Stay with us. We got a lot more to break down right here on the show. And back here on the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It's Chris Carter and Brian Batko breaking things down before Steelers Raiders. Okay, Brian, let's get into this matchup a little bit more. Let's talk more about the overall logistics of the game. I was going to pick the Raiders to win this game because I thought the balance of Josh Jacobs with Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfro's back and Darren Waller's back, and you got Derek Carr as a balanced quarterback. I was like, that's too much for the Steelers.
It's the first two-dimensional offense that the Steelers have faced since the Bengals, really.
Yeah. Exactly. And they gave up 37 points to that group. Granted, I will say Joe Burrow's playing a lot better than Derek Carr, and they have a lot more going for them with Jamar Chase and everything and how that rhythm of that offense is going. And the Raiders only beat the Patriots last week because of the dumbest play I've seen in such a long time.
Well, they might have beaten them in overtime. We don't know.
Beaten them in overtime. Very true. Very true. Because I still don't understand what the Patriots were doing there. But
were you watching that live?
No, I was covering Pitt hoops. Oh, no, no, that was the Colts game. No, I saw it after the fact. I did not see the end of that game live.
I was watching it live. I like with two kids, I don't get to watch a ton of non-Steelers football as it happens, but that one I happened to be in front of the TV just catching the end of the afternoon games, and man, and was I fortunate that I was there to see that unfold in real time.
That's insane. That's one of those games that you will remember watching that ending for the rest of your life.
I will remember I was in my white recliner chair in the living room.
My white recliner. You have a white recliner chair? That must be tough to keep clean.
It's cream.
Oh, okay. I get that. Before we get into more furniture talk, let's talk more about this matchup. Like I said, I actually think that this week, Franco Harris's passing, I think, is going to have this place supercharged at Acrisure Stadium. I think the team is going to be supercharged, and something that you and I have talked about a lot this year. This Steelers team is a team that needs to get out in front, needs to get a lead so that its defense can sort of play more aggressively. They can run the ball on offense. They're taking more time off the clock, and this is a game where I think that if they do those things, they could legitimately win this game. Right now, the Steelers have the Steelers have the seventh best time of possession average in the NFL with over 31 minutes. The Raiders 15th, right in the middle of the league. I think this is a game where if you don't give the Raiders offense enough chances, a whole bunch of shots with Devontae Adams and how that offense works to score in this cold weather game, you can grind this game out. If you get an early lead, that puts you in the driver's seat to control it the way the Steelers offense, or sorry, the Steelers roster is built this year.
Yeah, there's going to be some schematical issues for the Steelers to address. You know, how do you deal with these Raiders pass rushers? I mean, do you give Chuks Okorafor some help against Max Crosby, who was an absolute force in this matchup week 2 last year? I was shocked, Chris, to look back and see that Crosby did not have a sack in that game, but he had 5 quarterback hits. So I'm like, all right, yeah, that tracks. He had Ben Roethlisberger in a not so good place that day in Pittsburgh. But on the other side, I mean, Chandler Jones, he's not what he once was, but he's still pretty good, especially if you don't lateral the ball to him and on the last play of the game. So he can still hurt you. You know, what do they do over there with Dan Moore? Is this a game where Dan Moore needs to stand up more one-on-one? And maybe he does have a chance to build off, which I think was maybe the best I've seen him play against Carolina. So yeah, a lot of question marks here. As always with this team, they're never going to go out there and blow anybody out, I don't think. It is going to be an interesting adjustment to see how a warm weather team travels across country on a short week, and you know, what can they do, and what's going to be a unique atmosphere even for a lot of the guys who've been playing in Pittsburgh for the last few seasons. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see it. I'm glad I'll be in the press box where it's usually pretty chilly in the Acrisure press box, but it won't have anything on the outside in this game. And as we were talking about before, Devontae Adams, how do you handle him? How do you handle Hunter Renfrow? I imagine the Steelers are going to want to play more 3-4 defense in this game. But if the Raiders go to their 11 personnel, who's matching up with Renfrow? So it'll be a bit of a chess match, as it always is. Josh McDaniels needs this to some degree, and if it goes his way, we know the Steelers they'll basically be on the outside looking in of not just the playoffs, but that non-losing season streak for Mike Tomlin will be over.
It will be. It's also gone for the Steelers since 2003, the last time that's happened here in Pittsburgh. I do think it's going to be interesting. I wonder if this is a game where we see more of those 3 safety sets with DeMonte KZ, Terrell Edmunds, and Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, and that was the nice thing about KZ. You can trust him in run support and in coverage to some extent.
And you're going to need both in this game. And there's that flexibility that you're talking about. Certainly think it's going to be huge here. Let's get to these picks here. What's your final score? How do you see this game playing out with Steelers Raiders Saturday night?
Yeah, I just it's a hard one to call for me, and whatever I say, take with a grain of salt, because I am 4-10 this season picking Steelers games. I have no room to criticize the team considering relative to job performance, I'm actually 2 games worse than they are this year. So I'm going to do the classic move of in my heart of hearts, in my sound mind, I think the Steelers win this game with all the momentum of Franco Harris behind them and just the Immaculate Reception anniversary, in addition to having some of those built-in advantages. But because of that, I'm going to pick the Raiders and fade myself as a means to try to get a game right for once. I'll say Vegas 24, Steelers 21.
I hear you on that. 24-21, that's an interesting pick there. I'm going to not fade myself. I'm going to say, you know what? Steelers are going to go get a win here. I'm saying 23-17. I think the Steelers find a way to win. They come up with that momentum that we've been talking about here. One thing also that was pointed out to me by my man, your boy Q, who runs he also runs the Raider Nation radio network. But Q pointed out, he's like, listen, man, whenever something weird goes on, like when Jeff Saturday took over the Colts, we're still the only team to have lost to the Colts since he's taken over. When Baker Mayfield got his first start for the Rams, blew that. And he's like, and last week we needed the craziest play that we've seen all season long to beat the Patriots. He's like, now this week you're telling me that Franco Harris passed away just a few days before the 50th anniversary of the Immaculate Reception. He's like, nah. He's like, this is even he was like, I can't see the Raiders winning this game because of all the weird stuff that's going on.
But the difference though is like those first two that you mentioned, losing to Jeff Saturday fresh out of the ESPN booth and losing to Baker Mayfield fresh off the couch or whatever. I mean, those were games that everyone thought there's no way Josh McDaniels and the Raiders can lose, and they lost. This is the opposite, where it's like there's no way they can win this with everything, all the universe factors around the Steelers right now. I mean, it's a juicy storyline for sure. This is a kind of a classic rivalry too that is dissipated over the years. 2 playoff appearances in 20 years for the Raiders will kind of take the bite out of that a little bit. But we know that the Raiders have beaten the Steelers when they shouldn't over these last couple decades with Terrell Pryor, Bruce Gradkowski, and even the last couple times they've played, albeit with Derek Carr in there, they've kind of had the Steelers number for whatever reason. So I kind of think that in 5-degree weather and 30-mile-per-hour winds, you can kind of throw all of that out the window. But it's going to be a slobber knocker Saturday night, and I do think that's going to make for a pretty evenly matched game that could go either way. What else is new with the 2022 Steelers?
Certainly, it's been a very different year. We'll see how that plays out. Acrisure Stadium, Saturday night, Christmas Eve. It'll be cold. If you're there, bundle up. We'll be bundled up in the press.
If you're there, I have a lot of respect for you.
Absolutely. Just don't be one of the crazy people that want to prove themselves and go out there shirtless or wearing shorts or some stuff. Bundle up, man. We don't need y'all getting frosty.
You think anybody's going to do that from the Steelers or the Raiders? Somebody probably will, right?
Somebody's going to be trying no sleeves. Like
somebody's always that guy.
Yeah. There's I think it's going to be very interesting to see who tries.
It used to be Shazier, right? Didn't Shazier love doing that?
Take off his shirt and he would just be out there like, I'm taking on the elements, man. When I played football, I had my Under Armour over a turtleneck. I ain't playing that kind of stuff.
Michael Irvin is going to be on this game, and to quote the great poet, when we played in that cold weather, we was cold. So that'll be another thing I'm watching for, is Michael Irvin all bundled up on the sideliners. He's nice and cozy up where we are.
Certainly, it's going to be a fun one. Check it out Saturday night. We'll have everything here for you, covering the game for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter and Brian Batko, happy holidays, everyone. Merry Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa. We hope you enjoy everything. We'll be back explaining everything that happened next week. But until then, you enjoy your holidays, breaking everything down. Check out the Post-Gazette content from the game and leading up to it. It'll be a fun one. See you then, and happy holidays again. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.